A lovely good evening to Jignesh sir and whoever views this video afterwards. Today we are here to witness how we harness the power of the tides. That is a brief journey through the tidal power plants. So I am Suraj Singh Ragunj and let's begin with the presentation. So before moving on, let's have a quick view of the chain of events that will be following through. First will be introduction on what are tidal power plants, then the principle behind their functioning, then what is the functioning of the tidal power plants, then the components, that is major parts and the layout of the tidal power plants, then applications of the tidal power plants, where they are used and how they serve their purpose, then a set of disadvantages and a set of disadvantages of them. Then some facts about tidal power plants, interesting ones, of course, and then popularity and awareness of tidal power plants in the current state of the world, and then the conclusion itself, a overall summary. So now let's move on. So, what are tidal power plants? Tidal power plants can be summarized as an innovative source of renewable energy that harnesses the power of tidal waves to generate electricity. As we know that due to the gravitational pull of the moon on the Earth's surface, there are varied differences in the height of the water level of various water bodies, primarily being the oceans and the lakes, which causes high tides and low tides. So these are harnessed to rotate the turbines and generate electricity, which we will be discovering and exploring in depth afterwards. So the concept of using tidal power as a source of energy has been around for centuries. It isn't a very new concept, with the early examples dating back to the Middle Ages, where tide mills were used to grind grains. And over time, this technology has evolved, and one of the first major applications of the principle of the tidal waves to generate electricity was when it was built in France in 1960s. And since then, numerous tidal power plants have been made, and thus we can conclude that they have a rich history and they continue to gain more importance as a very good option for sustainable energy source. Now let's explore the functioning and the principle behind it. So the basic principle is that we have to harness the kinetic energy that follows through when there is change in the water level, that is during the high tides and the low tides, to convert electrical energy. These are done by the turbines which rotate due to the flow of water during high tides and low tides, and thus they produce electricity. And then the amount of energy generated by tidal power plants depends on various factors. Some of them are the height of the tide, that is, at what rate the water level is increasing or decreasing, the speed of the water flow. Is the speed enough to rotate the turbines, or the change in the water level is too slow to rotate the turbines? And then the size of the turbine, bigger the amount of electricity that is generated. And then we can also say that its potential to provide a significant amount of renewable energy with minimal impact on environment is a great surplus that we can use from it. Now, moving on to the functioning of tidal power plants. So, tidal power plants, as we have explored previously, uses the principle of change in water level during various high tides and low tides, and it's converting mechanical energy to electrical energy helps in generating electricity overall. It has large turbines that are placed underwater and are driven by the force of the moving water. And we can say that this is the main function. And after that, the power generated is supplied to the main grid, from where it can be used by the public or any other destination. So now, what are the components of the tidal power plant? So this is going to take some time. So there are various minor and other components that will be functioning and contributing to the functioning of the tidal power plant. However, the let's cover the major parts. So the first key component that we will be going through are the barrage. Barrage are dam-like structures that are built across the tribal estuary or bay. So tribal estuary or bay are the minor bodies where the water flows in or drains out during high tides and low tides, respectively. So these are the barrages that are made. I hope you can see the pointer. And then they also contain the sluice gates, which open and close to allow the flow of the water from the estuary to the ocean or ocean to the estuary. That is vice versa. So these are the sluice gates, these two columns, that it is the side cross-sectional view. And then We also have the turbine. So the turbine is located just here, that is in between the path of the tidal waters source and destination, that is the ocean and the turbine. So from here the turbine rotates and the electricity is generated and then transferred to the grid. So the grid can be represented here by the power lines. And then the third or the last component that we can say is the electrical grid and the monitoring system. So monitoring systems is of course to regulate the voltage and other parts, and so that it can be safely transmitted to the grid and it can be used by the public and factories and all. So now moving on to the applications of tidal power plants. Tidal power plants have a wide range of applications. That is, it does not just only help in generating electricity, it has various other applications unlike other power plants such as the solar and hydro and any other power plants. So one of the major ones is desalinating plants. That is where the ocean water is converted to fresh water, and it is one of the major applications because nowadays we are heavily relying on desalinating ocean water to be used for drinking and other freshwater purposes. And one of the most promising applications, that is which is one of the most trusted, is in the field of transportation. So why transportation? It is because it is used to power ships and boats, and thus it reduces the need of fossil fuel, and it because of this it reduces pollution and our carbon footprint. And additionally it can be also used to power offshore rigs, which if not for the tidal power plants, it heavily relies on petroleum and other fossil fuels, and thus it becomes a renewable source of energy for these operations. And then moving on, it is also essential in the field of agriculture. Why essential? That is because it helps in powering irrigation systems, which otherwise would take a lot of effort and other sources. And then it also allows farmers to grow crops in areas where otherwise it would be unsuitable. That is, it provides external assistance via powering irrigation systems, providing fresh water, and various other purposes. And thus, it has the potential to increase food supply and production, that surplus. And then also, it improves food security. So, of course, if the food production is more, then we are going to not suffer from any dangers of food scarcity or anything else. Thus, it improves and bolsters our food security. In regions where water is scarce, that is, of course, it helps in transporting water and powering irrigation systems where water is scarce, and otherwise, we would not be able to use that land to its full potential. Now, moving on to the advantages. We have explored the basics of how it functions and its applications and what the principle lies behind its functioning. So now let's explain and dive into its advantages. So tidal power plants have several advantages over other forms of renewable energy. One major advantage is its predictability and reliability. So we all know that we have effectively studied the motions and patterns of the movement of Earth and Moon with respect to each other, so that we can very efficiently read what are the effects and patterns of the gravitational pull of moon on earth's surface, that is to study the high tides and lower tides. Thus it makes tidal power plants a very reliable source. That is, if you see, if essentially solar power plants are useless during nights, wind power plants are useless when there is no wind blowing, and dams or the hydropower plants are useless when the rivers run dry, that is seasonal rivers or any other cause. So in these situations, tidal power plants are one of the most reliable and predictable sources and options. Some other advantages we can say are that they are highly efficient and produce a lot of energy relative to their size compared to other power plants. For example, it is a proven fact and data that it can generate up to 80% of its maximum output capacity, which is extremely generous when we take in consideration other power plants. And it also has low greenhouse gas emissions, less pollution, less carbon footprints, and it also has a long lifespan and low operational cost. Once it has been established, it consumes less to none cost and monetary investments. But it's just like a coin, it has two faces. So now we are here on the negative side, the second phase, that is what are its disadvantages. So if you look at its disadvantages, one of the major disadvantages, as we have may guess from the word tidal, is that it has detriment effects on the marine ecosystem. That is, various sea creatures such as fish or any other upper level flowing and swimming animals or sea horses or any other things, they can get into the turbine, and they can get caught in them, and that is a very huge problem in tidal power plants. Then additionally, tidal power plants can be expensive to build. Previously I mentioned that after its establishment, the cost for its operation is very low. However, its establishment, that is its initial investment, capital investment, and what we spend after periodically for its maintenance, that is a bit high, and if you can say very less, and not so cost effective compared to other forms of renewable energy such as solar power plants or all, where the installment and its maintenance is quite cheap, if you say. Then the potential impact on marine ecosystem, as we discussed earlier, and the migratory patterns. We know that various seasonal changes force fishes and all to migrate, and that pattern can be disrupted by it. And then potential disruptions to the tidal flow and sedimentation, that is the flow of upper layer of the soil during high tides and low tides, which influences the fertility of the soil, that can be disrupted. Now, moving on to some interesting facts about tidal power plants. It is not a very new idea. It has been dated back to the 7th century in Europe. Here you can see a picture of one of the old blueprints of how tidal power plants were planned to be built. Then the estimated potential energy contained in the global tidal resources could exceed 700 terawatt hours. That the total amount of power generated by all the tidal power plants throughout the world, and that is a very high portion of the world's electricity demand. That is a very high achievement that we have achieved through tidal power plants. Then the largest tidal power plant in the world is in Siva Lake, South Korea, and that has a capacity of 254 megawatts. That is highly appreciable when it comes to the terms of the tidal power plants and the electricity it generates. Then we can also it also provides various other services and shall I say applications, such as flood control, highly efficient in that. It helps in improved navigations for waterways, and it creates freshwater reservoirs, that is highly helpful for irrigation and drinking water supply. And moving on, it can also complement other renewable sources. Like as I mentioned earlier, most of the other power plants have zero functionality in some period of time or in some conditions, and that gap can be filled by the tidal power plants. And thus, it complements other power plants very well, and it helps in improving overall grid stability. Now, what is the popularity and awareness of tidal power plants in the current status of the world? Tidal power plants have been around for several decades. However, they have not been recognized as much as the other power plants, such as wind or solar power plants. However, there is a recent surge in interest and awareness owing to its advantages and its easy use and application, and also being as a source of clean energy, that is to promoting conservation of energy and green source, so to say. And as more research is conducted and technology continues to improve, the efficiency and the maximum output of this particular category of power plant, that is tidal power plant, is going to exponentially increase, and that itself shows the heavy underlying potential it has. In addition, increased public awareness and education about the benefits of tidal power plants could lead to greater support and investment in this promising form of renewable energy. More investments, more construction, more research, thus a great potential that can be discovered in this field, that is tidal power plants. Now, moving on to the conclusion. So, what all we learned, and what can we say is the overall summary of this presentation? Tidal power plants have the potential to provide a significant source of renewable energy. The trend of high tide and low tide is not going to stop in the near future. We can all be assured of that, because Earth and Moon are going to exist for a long period of time. So we can say that energy can be generated via tidal power plants will last for a long timeline. Also, it's popular and widespread. It is not as popular and widespread as other forms of renewable energy, and we can make that better by increasing awareness and public engagement and research in this field. And also, it is a very attractive option for coastal communities. That is where high tides and low tides are the most frequent and more accessible to use. However, it is important to consider that environmental impact of building and operating these plants is high detriment to the funding in the initial stages, that we can work more in that field. And the disruption to marine ecosystems and potential harm to marine life, we can also look into that. We have to combat that disadvantage, and we can look into that further. And for in talking of terms of energy production, every power plant has its own trade-offs. So these were the advantages and these were the disadvantages. However, I think that it is one of the more effective forms of renewable energy compared to other power plants. And thus we reach the ending of this presentation. Thank you and have a great day.